Hello and welcome to our podcast. I'm Tom, this is Johnson, and today's topic is Israel.
Well, Tom, I think we should boycott Israel because it is a state that violates human rights each and every day, and Israel is using its power to hurt people. When any country uses power to hurt the civilian population, then that country needs to be criticized and protested against. Today, I am protesting Israel. Tomorrow, I'll protest China.
Well, Johnson, in my opinion, I believe that Israel was actually one of the most moral states in the entirety of the world. It was actually voted by the United Nations as one of the top 10 most moral countries within the United Nations party. In fact, Israel releases notes before bombing locations to make sure that no civilians are injured. They routinely take care of civilians from opposing sides. And if you even ask one of our fellow friends, Elli, she can tell you her own personal experience with going into an Israeli hospital and seeing them taking care of Palestinians before they even take care of some Israelis. So not only do I believe that Israel is one of the most moral countries, I believe that it's kind of important that we don't hold Israel to this double standard, because it is not just Israel that sometimes violates human rights when they're in war. In fact, many countries do. As you said, China, Palestine, America, and many other countries all violate simple human rights when they're in wartime, or even if they're just trying to protect themselves. For instance, you can see this now with the Americans and how we treat the Mexicans that are trying to cross the border.
But how can you say you're Jewish and be part of a people that allows this kind of human rights abuse? Like, so much of the Jewish story is about being slaves in Egypt and oppressing others. And here are the Israelis doing just that, oppressing people and making them live like slaves.
To be honest, Johnson, I think that there's a very clear distinction between the way that the Jewish people were treated in Egypt and how the Palestinians are being treated in the West Bank specifically, because we've already discussed the difference between the West Bank and the state. So I believe that within the West Bank that there is a mismanagement of how the Israelis are treating the Palestinians. I believe that a lot of the time there's a very large confusion on to how to deal with this weird territory, which is just unsettled since the Israelis won the land in 1948. And I believe that because of that, we are in a very weird issue where everybody doesn't really know what to do. And I believe that a lot of this has to do with the fact that Israelis are doing the majority of this for self-defense purposes. A lot of this comes as a reactionary clause to bombings, to Palestinians pushing out and creating their own neighborhoods which wouldn't allow Israelis in, throwing stones. Like, a lot of this human rights abuse, quote unquote, is a reactionary tale. And I believe that being forced to build pyramids and drag bricks around 50-ton bricks in the sand with no water or food is different than just not being allowed to vote.
Mm-hmm. So Tom, you talk about how Israel have settlements within the West Bank occupation, but how can it claim itself to be a democracy when she occupies other people and denies them the right to vote?
I would like to start off by debunking this idea of an occupation. One, the West Bank is a territory that was won by Israel during wartime, meaning that it does belong to Israel, but it is an unsettled territory, not an occupation. It does not belong to anyone else. Israel is not occupying it. It is just unclaimed territory that belongs to Israel technically. So, when we're talking about whether or not this infringes on Israel's right to be a democracy and how Israel does not allow people who are not Israeli citizens to vote from within the West Bank, it is simply because we are treating the West Bank as it is not part of Israel. Israeli citizens within the West Bank are allowed to vote simply because they are Israeli citizens. So, to wrap things up, West Bank is always going to be treated different than the state.
Okay. But Tom, Israel can't be a Jewish state and a democracy. Either Israel denies citizenship to all those who are Arab, and by doing so remains a Jewish state, or Israel allows all to vote, and then Israel will become a Palestinian state. Which do you think should happen?
Again, I think that it's good to have I think that it's important that we have things the way that they are, because we're treating the West Bank as separate. If we allowed everybody in the West Bank to vote, it's like claiming the West Bank as ours, which is something that we want to not do, because we want to eventually move into the possibility of giving the West Bank up to the Palestinian people. I don't think that not allowing the current Arabs within the West Bank settlement territory to vote makes us any less democratic or any less Jewish. The only reason why Jews get direct citizenship and are allowed to vote anyways are because Israel, under the Constitution, by the law that Bibi Netanyahu just passed, is natural citizens. Israel is the state of the Jewish people, so they're naturally allowed to vote. I don't think that one affects the other.
Okay. Well, all I'm saying is that if Israel would only end the occupation, so much of the anger and animosity about Israel from the rest of the world would go away.
I don't think that's true, Johnson. To be honest, I think a lot of this comes from false narratives. I think that, as we've debunked, a lot of this comes from the idea of the fact that the Palestinian people want Jerusalem, the Israeli people want Jerusalem, and until we can agree on who gets Jerusalem, one, there will be no end to this occupation. Two, there will be no end to the false news on both sides. And three, there will be constant human rights violations by both sides that will cost millions of lives. I think that the only way that we can get this to go away is by either reaching a peaceful conclusion on splitting Jerusalem more legally than it already is, or in the way that we seem to be headed, which is a violent ending. Well, guys, that's the rest of the time that we had for our podcast. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Signing off.